He told me he had an emergency appointment. Chest pains, he said. Couldn't wait. Kissed me on the cheek, right there in the hallway outside our shared office, and left with that familiar look of a man who had somewhere important to be. I watched him go. And then, 10 minutes later, I walked down to the parking garage to grab a contract from my car, and I saw exactly where that somewhere important was. He had her pressed against the hood of his Audi. My business partner. My friend. The woman whose daughter I had held at her baptism. They were kissing like they had all the time in the world. And I noticed, I don't know why this was the detail that burned itself into my brain, but I noticed that neither of them was wearing a wedding ring. I stood at the entrance to that garage for what felt like a full minute, maybe longer. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt something click off inside me, like a circuit breaker tripping in the dark. I turned around, walked back to the elevator, pressed the button for the 4th floor, and by the time those doors opened, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. My name is Renee, and I was 41 years old the day my life split in two. I had married Daniel when I was 27. He was charming in the specific way that dangerous men often are. Attentive, funny, good at making you feel chosen. We built something real together, or at least I thought we did. A house in Naperville, 2 kids, a boy and a girl, 9 and 12 at the time this story takes place. 14 years of marriage. Shared finances, shared friends, shared everything. And 6 years before that afternoon in the parking garage, I had gone into business with a woman named Sylvia. We had met at a marketing conference in downtown Chicago, bonded over bad hotel coffee, and within a year had co-founded a boutique communications firm together. We were 50-50 partners. She handled client relations, I handled operations. We had built that company from a rented desk and 1 laptop to a 12-person team with $2.3 million in annual revenue. I had trusted her with my professional life. I had trusted her with my personal life too, which turned out to be the more expensive mistake. Looking back, there were signs I explained away because I didn't want to see them. Daniel started going to the gym at odd hours, early mornings, late evenings. He bought new cologne I didn't recognize, something sharp and expensive that I never saw sitting on his dresser. He started closing his laptop when I walked into the room. He started laughing differently on phone calls. Lighter, younger somehow, like a version of himself I hadn't heard in years. And Sylvia started coming in late, started taking long lunches on days I was working remotely, started being vague about client meetings that didn't appear on our shared calendar. I noticed. But I told myself I was reading into things. I told myself I was stressed. I told myself that 14 years of marriage meant something, and that my best business partner would never do something like this to me. I was wrong about all 3. After I walked back upstairs that afternoon, I sat down at my desk and I pulled up our business banking portal. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I added a secondary authentication requirement that only I controlled. I called our accountant, David, and told him to flag any transfer requests that came from Sylvia's credentials until further notice. I didn't explain why. David asked no questions. Then, I changed every password. The accounting software, the client management system, the payroll portal, the company email admin account, the cloud storage. Every single one. I did all of this in 43 minutes. When I was done, I went to the bathroom, ran cold water over my wrists, looked at myself in the mirror for a long time, and went back to my desk. And I waited. Sylvia came back to the office about an hour after I'd seen her in that garage. She walked in with the practiced ease of someone who had been getting away with something for a long time. She smelled like the same sharp cologne Daniel had been wearing for months. I looked up from my screen and smiled at her. "How was lunch?" I asked. "Oh, just errands," she said. "Nothing interesting." Nothing interesting. She sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and tried to log into our client management system. The look on her face when the password failed. She tried it again, and again. Then she tried the accounting portal, then her email, then the shared drive. Each one, the same result. She stared at her screen for a moment, and I watched her from across the room while pretending to read a document. "Renee," she said carefully, "are you getting an error on the system? I can't seem to log in anywhere." "Really?" I said. "That's strange. Mine's working fine." She looked at me then, just for a second. A flicker. She knew, or she suspected. But she couldn't say anything, because saying anything would require explaining why she was suddenly paranoid, and the only reason to be paranoid was the reason she didn't want to name. "I'll call it," she said. "Sure," I said. "Good idea." That evening, I called a family law attorney named Margaret Holloway, who had been recommended to me by a colleague who had gone through a divorce 3 years earlier. Margaret was 62 years old, had been practicing for 30 years, and when I sat across from her desk and told her the situation, the affair, the business, the assets, she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Good. You didn't confront him. That's the smartest thing you could have done." We spent the next 11 weeks building a case. I stayed in the house. I stayed in the marriage, on the surface. I continued going to dinner with Daniel, sitting next to him at our son's soccer games, letting him kiss me on the cheek when he left for his alleged errands. Every time he told me he was working late, I wrote it down in a notebook I kept locked in my car. Every time there was a charge on our joint account I couldn't account for, I photographed the statement. A hotel in the West Loop, $387. A restaurant in River North, $240. Flowers charged to a vendor account that should have been used for client gifts. My attorney filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning in November. The papers were served to Daniel at his office, handed to him by a process server while he was in a meeting with 3 colleagues. He called me 40 seconds after it happened. I let it go to voicemail. "Renee, what is this? Call me back. You need to call me back right now." I did not call him back. The business dissolution was a separate legal proceeding. Because Sylvia and I were equal partners in a jointly owned company, the courts required a formal valuation and a negotiated buyout or split. What Sylvia didn't know, what she had never bothered to learn, even after 6 years of partnership, was that I had structured our operating agreement with a clause that allowed for immediate buyout at assessed value in the event of a material breach of fiduciary duty. Conducting a personal relationship with my spouse, using company resources to conceal it, including client lunches she had expensed as business development, qualified as that breach. My attorney sent her documentation of 11 separate expenses she had filed as business costs that were, in fact, personal dates with my husband. Restaurants. A weekend conference registration she had claimed was professional development and attended with Daniel. Sylvia's attorney advised her to settle. She bought out my share of the firm at full assessed value, $890,000, paid over 18 months. The divorce was finalized 7 months after I filed. Because Daniel had used marital assets, specifically $22,700 from our joint savings and a shared credit line, to fund the affair, the settlement was adjusted accordingly. I kept the house. I kept primary custody of both children. Daniel got his Audi, his new cologne, and a 1-bedroom apartment in Evanston. I heard through a mutual friend that Sylvia ended things with him about 4 months after the divorce was finalized. Apparently, the relationship had a different quality once it was no longer a secret. Once there was no thrill, no stolen lunches, no sneaking around. There wasn't much left. He apparently tried to call me twice in the spring. I didn't answer. I'm writing this from the kitchen of a house that is mine, completely mine, on a Saturday morning while my kids are still asleep upstairs. The firm I built from nothing is still running, under her name now, which is fine, because I've started something new, something that belongs only to me. There's a particular kind of peace that comes when you realize you don't have to be angry anymore. Not because you've forgiven anyone, but because you made every right move when it counted, and they are now living with the consequences of every wrong one. I saw him last month at our son's school play. He looked tired. I wore the green dress he always said was his favorite. I looked incredible.